Welcome to the inaugural episode of Fact Bites, the channel where we serve up bite-sized facts for your brain to snack on. If you like our video today, make sure you give us a thumbs up and click subscribe so you'll know whenever we upload a new bite. Thanks! In this video, the presidential line of succession, that is, the President of the United States line of succession. Basically, who takes over if the president steps down, is incapacitated, or dies while in office. You may be saying to yourself, I already know this. The vice president takes over if the president can't fulfill his duties. And that would be correct. But do you know who's next? There's an entire list of people who take over, and their order might surprise you. First, a little history. The U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 1 states the VP takes over if the President of the United States is removed from office, dies, resigns, or can no longer discharge the duties of the office. But life in the 1700s was pretty rough, and life expectancy was only around 40 years or so. So what happens if both the president and the vice president are incapacitated? In 1792, Congress passed the first Presidential Succession Act, addressing succession hierarchy. It stated that, in case of removal, death, resignation, or inability both of the President and Vice President of the United States, the President of the Senate pro tem, then the Speaker of the House of Representatives, shall act as President of the United States. This was a compromise between the two-party system at the time, the Federalists and those motherforkin' Democratic Republicans. Originally, the House of Representatives suggested that the Secretary of State should be next in line after the VP, but the current Secretary of State, a Democratic Republican, was so disliked by the Federalist Party that the Senate wouldn't ratify the act. And who was that Secretary of State? Declaration of Independence author Thomas Jefferson. That's right. Nobody liked that guy. So pretty straightforward, right? President, Vice President, President of the Senate pro tem, and then the Speaker of the House. Except in 1886, Congress passed another law removing the President of the Senate pro tem and the Speaker of the House from the line of succession. They were replaced by the President's cabinet members in order of rank, starting with the Secretary of State. This may have been in part because 5 years earlier, President James A. Garfield was assassinated, and once Vice President Chester A. Arthur took over, there was not, at that time, Vice President, President of the Senate, or Speaker of the House. Yikes, can you imagine that happening today? The 1886 Act held up until 1947, when President Harry S. Truman took office after the death of President Franklin Roosevelt. On examining the line of succession, he realized that if cabinet members were the next in line after the vice president, it could be said that the president was allowed to choose his own successor, a system Truman felt was constitutionally suspect. So, Congress was back at it again and signed into law the Presidential Succession Act of 1947. This act swapped the order once again, so that the vice president would be succeeded by the Speaker of the House, then the President pro tem of the Senate, then the cabinet members. One argument for this change was that the Speaker was an elected official, and therefore a more acceptable candidate to step into the role of president. Another theory is that Truman was not a fan of the current President pro tem, Senator Kenneth McKellar. On the other hand, he was very good friends with House Speaker Sam Rayburn. Listen, I don't want to say that Washington is full of mean girls, but guys, this is the second time in U.S. history that someone's been removed from the top of the succession list based on bro status. So let's take a look at who's in line. After the vice president, it's the Speaker of the House of Representatives. This position was established by the Constitution and is elected by the members of the House. It's usually the leader of the majority party. Keep in mind, this person may not be the same party as the president. Third in line is the President pro tem of the Senate. The President pro tem is another constitutionally recognized officer who presides over the Senate in the absence of the Vice President, the actual President of the Senate. The President pro tem is elected by the Senate and is by custom the senator of the majority party with the longest record of continuous service. Fourth is the Secretary of State. This is the first cabinet position in line for the presidency. They're followed by the Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense, Attorney General, and then get this, eighth in line for the presidency is the Secretary of the Interior. That's the person running the National Park Service, among other Department of Interior organizations. So that's like ending up with Ken Burns as your president. Or Leslie Knope. Actually, she'd make a great president. The list keeps going, including Secretaries of Agriculture, Commerce, Labor, Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, Transportation, Energy, Education, Veterans Affairs, and Homeland Security. There is only one rule or exception to assuming the position or powers of president, that the person must meet eligibility requirements outlined in the Constitution. This means they must be a natural-born U.S. citizen, over 35 years of age, and be a resident in the U.S. for the past 14 years. So how many times has the U.S. actually used the line of succession? Well, we've never gotten past a vice president, but on April 4th, 1841, Vice President John Tyler took over after William Henry Harrison died just a month into his presidency. As the first VP to take over for a president, Tyler's succession divided political players at the time. The Succession Act of 1792 did not clarify if the vice president would simply assume the duties of the president or if they would actually become president. When Harrison died, Tyler took the oath of office, making it clear that he was not going down in history as merely acting president. This was not constitutionally approved until the 25th Amendment, ratified in 1967. That's a full 126 years and 7 presidential successions later. In July 1850, Millard Fillmore took over after Zachary Taylor died. As a side note, both of the first 2 presidents to die in office died of disease, serving as an example why we should always be grateful to modern health and hygiene. April 15, 1865, Andrew Johnson assumed the presidency upon the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Fun facts about Andrew Johnson: he was impeached by the House of Representatives. He was then acquitted by the Senate by a single vote. He also served without a vice president, which would have sparked a real succession kerfuffle if he'd actually been removed from office. In 1881, Chester A. Arthur took over after James Garfield was assassinated. Arthur's succession brought into play another issue which would not be resolved until the 25th Amendment in 1967. Who gets to decide if the president is unable to discharge the duties of the office? Garfield was shot in July of 1881, but didn't die until September that same year, leaving the presidency in limbo for several months. The 25th Amendment states that the vice president and a majority of the cabinet members can declare a president unfit for office by written declaration to the president pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives. If that happens, the vice president assumes the duties of the president but does not actually become president. The 25th Amendment also states that the president can hand over duties to the vice president by written declaration to the president pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. He can then assume those duties again with another written declaration to both officials. In 1901, Theodore Roosevelt took over after William McKinley was assassinated in office. Calvin Coolidge in 1923 after Warren G. Harding died of a heart attack. 1945, Harry Truman becomes president when Franklin Roosevelt died during his 3rd term. Lyndon Johnson took the presidential oath of office on Air Force One, just hours after the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas. And the last time the president was succeeded by their VP was August 9th, 1974. Gerald Ford took over after Richard Nixon's resignation due to the Watergate scandal. The first and only time a VP took over when the president resigned. In addition, 3 times the president has temporarily turned over their powers to their vice president. George H.W. Bush became acting president after President Ronald Reagan was shot in 1985. And Vice President Dick Cheney did so twice during George W. Bush's presidency while W was undergoing medical procedures requiring anesthesia. So that's the presidential line of succession. What did you think of the list? Let us know in the comments below, and if you like this video, make sure to give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And before you go, here's some parting fact bites. Did you know that John Adams became the first president to reside in the White House? He moved in on November 1st, 1800. 14 years later, the British burned that White House down during the War of 1812, and the White House was first wired for electricity in 1891. Thanks for watching, and come back soon for more fact bites.